All right, welcome back, Florida Football Insiders podcast. You just heard from the voice of the Miami Hurricanes, Joe Zagacki, talking about the 2023 Hurricanes. And next up on our preview list is the Central Florida Knights, UCF. Gus Malzahn and company making the big jump to the Big 12 this year, coming off a 9-5 season in 2022. Again, big move there for UCF joining the Big 12, obviously with all the realignment stuff. They were kind of ahead of the curve, which was a great thing for UCF, and we'll see a lot of benefits moving forward for the UCF athletics program. And no better person to talk all things UCF other than our guy Matt Murschel from the Orlando Sentinel. You've heard me talk with Matt many times the last year or so about Florida State. He is now covering the UCF beat there in Orlando. So welcome to the podcast, Matt. Appreciate you joining us.
No problem. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, let's get right to it. Talk about the chatter about joining the Big 12 and what has been the kind of the community sentiment and campus and athletics wise about the challenge and thrill of joining such a big league and such a well-known football conference.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement, as you can imagine. I mean, they've known about this for a couple of years now. They accepted the invitation, and then they kind of had to wait until everything could kind of become official and the buyout and everything. And this is it. They've been welcomed in along with BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati. As you mentioned, they were ahead of the curve. As you look at all the realignment news, I don't think anyone would have thought 2 years ago when this first move came about for the Big 12 that we would see so much movement, that the Pac-12 would basically collapse and these other schools would join the Big 12. So they really kind of got in on the ground floor, so to speak, when it came to realignment, and it's really helped them out. They don't have to feel necessarily like they're trying to find a home or somewhere to go to. And like I said, excitement has been the main word. This is something that UCF fans and the UCF athletic department and the football program have been building up for. They wanted to do this back in 2013. They submitted a proposal. They wanted the Big 12 to accept them. It didn't happen at that time, so there was a lot of disappointment, but then it came around this time around. Obviously the 2017, 2018 seasons really kind of had a big factor in some of this decision, the success that they've had as well. So lots of excitement. And as you mentioned, lots of financial implications for this move. But almost doubles, almost to the point of being triples what they were making from the American Athletic Conference when it comes to media rights deal. That's huge for them. Lots of buzz, lots of attention. All their games are going to be on big major networks with ESPN and Fox. So everyone's excited, almost to the point of wanting to move past that. Gus Malzahn in the beginning of preseason camp, we kept asking about the Big 12, and he finally just said, we're past that. We got to move on and get to talking football and what we need to do. So they're not focused so much so on that as in just playing their football games, but others outside the program, everybody really is looking forward to this season.
Has Gus talked about how he thinks the recruiting is maybe already improved, knowing that they're going to the Big 12? Obviously, the high profile aspect you mentioned of all their games are going to be on TV. Gus is used to big profile programs. Obviously, his time at Auburn. What's been his thought about the recruiting side of things? How that's going to improve things?
Oh, the recruiting it's already paid off. I mean, and he knew that when they accepted the invitation, that then they could go into kids' homes and say, "Listen, we're going to be in the Big 12 in a couple of years. We're going to be in the Big 12 in a year." And that's really paid off. They've been able to add a lot of talent to this roster. This 2024 recruiting class is ranked in the top 30 right now, which has never happened in UCF football history. He's got 9 4-star players. That's something they haven't been able to do. They've got a lot of guys around the state of Florida, which they've done a great job of. Orlando, they've hooked a lot of local kids. He's been doing that over the last couple of years. But I asked Gus about recruiting, and he said, yeah, believe me, the Big 12 is a big part of what we're trying to do. Kids are excited about this. They want to be able to play on a national stage. They want to be able to play for, college football playoff championship, So this Big 12 has really helped them out. And of course, everything kind of parlays into that recruiting success. You look at the fact that when they get more money, they'll upgrade facilities, they'll do things like that. That's going to be an attractive option. Plus, anytime you can point to the TV, like as I mentioned, and say, look, we're on, Thursday night on FS1, I think kids are going to be excited to know they're going to be able to be on national television and people are going to be able to watch them.
All right, let's get to the guys on the field, the current roster and such. Let's start with the offense. Obviously, John Reese Plumlee comes back as the starting quarterback. Led the team with over 800 yards rushing last year, almost 2,600 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, 8 picks. To me, the one thing with that offense, we know when Gus was really successful at Auburn, a tremendously strong running game, offensive line, running backs. Where does John Reese Plumlee need to improve? To me, passing, he's just not been a consistent enough passer. Is that the biggest part of his game that needs to improve?
Yeah, well, in the offseason, Gus brought in Darren Henshaw, to be the new offensive coordinator, and he's a guy that had some familiarity with Gus, and Gus said, "Listen, I'm going to turn over play calling duties to Darren, because he said I've got a lot of things I got to do with name, image, and likeness, and some of the he kind of took on kind of a GM role more, in this thing, and so Darren Henshaw came in with the idea of we're gonna expand this offense, we're gonna push this offense, they want to push the ball downfield. They felt like last year they just didn't do enough of that, and that getting the ball downfield and going vertical really kind of helps the running game, and that's going to be something they're going to have to do. So when he took over the quarterback's coaching duty, he sat down with John Rice Plumlee. One of the things they talked about is they don't want him to run nearly as much as he did last year. They felt like at the end of last season, Gus told me he was beat up, he was banged up. He took onus on that. Gus said, "Listen, I shouldn't have run him as much as I did, because that really hurt us in the end because he was just banged up." And so the thought now is they want John Rice Plumlee to be a better quarterback. They want him to sit in the pocket, to make his reads, to find his talented receivers, to find the escape valve, to look for guys instead of having to feel right away that he has to run with the football, because they don't want to take that away from him, but they also know that they can't have him be the leading rusher on this team. They've got 5 talented running backs coming in, leading with RJ Harvey, and they feel like those guys can carry the bulk of the rushing duties. They want John Rice really to kind of sit in the pocket and find those receivers and make plays. Now, I asked Gus, I said, "How do you take a dual threat guy and maybe rein him in a little bit?" And he said it's really hard because he brought up Cam Newton. You remember when he had Cam Newton? He said, "I told Cam Newton all the time. I said, Cam, you gotta run out of bounds. You gotta slide. We don't want you to get hurt." And he said Cam ignored every instruction I gave him on that front. And he said, and he was successful. So he said, "I've done the kind of with John Rice. I've told him, listen, you got to be better, but I'm not going to put handcuffs on him." He said, "These guys going to be able to do his thing." So I think what you're going to see in year 2 with John Rice is just that maturity of stepping up, making throws, finding the open receiver, and not maybe getting happy feet and trying to run out of the pocket anytime there's a little bit of pressure.
One of the biggest jumps, I guess, that you will see, obviously jumping from UCF to the Big 12, bulk of the offensive line, depth of the O-line. Talk about the offensive line. Are they prepared to be able to compete at the Big 12 level from an offensive line perspective?
Yeah, that's a unit that Gus has talked a lot about in the preseason, and they really like the depth they built on both the offensive and defensive lines. And he pointed the offensive line and said, "We need to be deeper. We need to be better in that because they've got 6 road games this year. They go to Boise State. That's going to be a long trip for them." He understands there are going to be a lot of guys that are going to get tired. They need to switch some guys out. So in the offseason, they brought in 4 offensive linemen, guys with experience. Drake Metcalf, who's going to take over at center. He's a guy from Stanford. Bula Schmidt was a guy who started 30 or so games at Fresno State. He's going to start at left guard. You look at a guy like Murschel. He was at Kent State. They're bringing him in. He's going to play right tackle at this point. Amari Kite comes in. He's probably going to step in and back up in some spots. So they've got a lot of guys that they feel like have experience from the transfer portal. They've got guys they've been developing. They feel like that's going to be an opportunity for them to run. I think Gus told us maybe they feel like they can go 9-10 deep on the offensive line now. I mean, and that's something they haven't been able to do. And he thinks it's going to be a huge benefit for them, especially when they get down the road and some of these long road trips, when they go to Oklahoma, when they go to Lubbock for Texas Tech, that's going to be where they need the depth.
Talk about some of the skill guys. You'd mentioned RJ Harvey. They seem like they're pretty excited about their wide receiver core. If Plumlee can get them the ball, they like what they have out wide. Talk about the skill guys a little bit.
Yeah, the running back room, they said, is the best they've had. They got 5 guys, different types of styles. RJ Harvey is going to be the primary back, but they got Johnny Richardson, who's a speedster, a guy who can really break big plays. They've got Jordan McDonald, who's a guy short yardage back they really like. DeMarcus Bowman's a guy that they brought in. He's a transfer from Florida a couple of years ago. They feel like he could really be a big-time bruiser. So they like the running backs room. You look at the receivers. They got Javon Baker, Kobe Hudson coming back. Xavier Townsend's coming back. Townsend was injured last year. They feel like he can take on a bigger role this year. They brought in some transfers as well in that position. Trent Whitmore from Florida comes in as well. They feel like they're set at that position. They feel like those guys are really going to stand out. And then you got the tight ends. Let's talk about Alec Holler, who's been around for a long time. He's really going to be the primary. They brought in a freshman in Randy Pittman, who was really highly regarded. He's had a great camp. They feel like he could step up and be able to make some plays as well. So I think there's more than enough skilled position players around John Rice Plumlee that he's got opportunities to make this offense a lot more versatile than it was last year.
Looking to the defense, to me, the looking at their stats and just watching them play a few times, getting disruption with the front seven would seem to be the biggest issue. Pass rush, that kind of stuff. Again, back to the trenches, being able to hold up in the trenches. Obviously, the Big 12 is not a huge running league, so you don't have to be as dominant, but it's important to be able to put pressure on the quarterback with as much passing that goes on in the Big 12. Talk about the defensive side of the ball, front seven especially, where they need to get better.
Yeah, and that's a group where they're really excited about. You look at, Josh Salazar comes back, Ricky Barber, Tremont Morris Brash. Those guys have come back. They've got lots of experience in the defensive line. Lee Hunter steps in at that defensive tackle position. They really like Lee. He wasn't really in shape last year. They feel like his motor is great. I've had so many guys tell me this fall camp that he's a guy to watch. They feel like he can really put a lot of pressure. They want to be disruptive, as you mentioned up front. They've got to get to the quarterback. They've got to stop the running game because they've got some guys in the secondary they feel like can make plays. They need to make some turnovers. That's something that they got to focus on. They've got a deep linebacker core. Jason Johnson had over 120 tackles last year. He leads the linebackers. Walter Yates III is back as well. And then the secondary, this is a younger secondary, Brandon Adams, Corey Thornton, Quadric Bullard, Nikai Martinez, but they've also got some depth in the secondary as well. So Addison Williams, the new defensive coordinator, he was there last year as their defensive backs coach. He's taken on the role of defensive coordinator now. And, he told us, listen, we want to be aggressive. We've got to stop the run, but we also got to create turnovers because they know if they can flip the field, short field, that just makes that offense more opportunities to score points.
Listen to Matt Murschel, Orlando Sentinel. We're previewing the UCF Knights as they head into year one of the Big 12, their big transition. Let's get to the schedule. You kind of mentioned it a little bit before, a lot of road games. This week they're at Boise State which is a big non-conference game, long trip to Boise, Idaho. You go to Kansas State, you go to Oklahoma, you go to Cincinnati. Just talk about the gruel and just the grueling road trip that UCF drew in year one.
Yeah, I think Gus has talked about this a lot about this road schedule. Listen, they got 6 road games. I think it's they travel the most miles than anyone in the Big 12 this year. I think it's 17,000 miles when you look at round trip. It's a lot of road trips. And what Gus talked about a lot was not so much the, yes, you have to prepare for that, but he talked about it's on the back end of the trips that you start to feel it. He said, listen, the Boise State game, for instance, he said, we probably won't get back to Orlando until the sun comes up, 6, 7 a.m. in the morning. Our flight gets back here. He's like, that's going to change how we handle things because normally they like to practice, on Sunday afternoons. Yeah. Well, they may not be able to do that because when they're traveling so much, he said they may have to push things back a little. So That's going to have to change some things. So they have to change up a little bit of their schedule. They have to understand that, yes, we're going to be on the road. We're going to face hostile crowds. We're going to be in places we haven't been before. I think that's going to be a challenge. I mean, I don't think anyone can prepare for, being in Manhattan, for the Kansas State game or going to Oklahoma, Norman, that's a historic site, and playing there. Going to Lubbock, Texas Tech is going to be interesting. So there are some challenges I think that this team is going to face. So they're going to have to find a way to kind of put that aside and not focus so much on being on the road and just focus on like it's a regular football game. But again, it's a lot of miles on this team. And that's where the depth that they've tried to build up over the last 2 years is really, they think will pay off in the end.
Does Gus realistically, I mean, he's probably never going to say this publicly, but do you think that deep down Gus realistically thinks this is a year, if we can go 500 in the Big 12, it's a hell of a year for us?
Oh, he'll never say that. I mean, I think their focus is winning the Big 12. Obviously, they feel that way. I think they've got the best chance of any of the new teams coming in. I think they're the better fit and equipped, and I think they'll do better than a lot of people give them credit for. I think they were picked to finish 8th in the media poll. I had them at 7. Right. I just think some of these road games are going to be a little challenging. I think, and then as you said, you're making the adjustment. You're stepping up and playing a different level of competition. Gus is familiar with that, but you got a lot of these players who've been playing in the American. They haven't played in it. Let's just say, a Kansas State, who's been there, Baylor, for instance. You're going to get some of these challenges coming in, Oklahoma even. So they have to kind of adjust to that. So I think they feel like, listen, if they can be bowl eligible or they can get to 7 or 8 wins, I think that's pretty good. I have in my mind an 8-win season. I think they can get there. Now, if they stay healthy, I think they got a great chance. And there's opportunities to flip some games that maybe they aren't going to be favored in.
Right.
But Gus will never say publicly, we want to go 5-1. I think he feels like they want to win every game as much as they can. And that's why I think he's trying to deflect a little bit the attention on the Big 12. I don't think he wants everyone to focus on I think he wants to focus on one game at a time, which, every coach puts that out there as well.
Last thing I'll get you at, coaching staff wise, I know you mentioned Darren Henshaw coming in on the offense. Or any other major coaching changes on the staff?
No, I think Darren's the big one. I mean, Darren was a guy, and Darren, listen, he's former UCF quarterback.
Right.
He's a guy that knows the history of the school. He went to UAB. He went over to UAB last year. I think he was working with them. He worked with Gus 2 years ago as an analyst. I think the biggest thing for Darren is just developing the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks have talked all about how they've gotten so much better in the footwork. They've gotten so much better in reading defenses. Those are the little things that necessarily don't show up in the stat box so much, but I think are going to be huge for them because they need to understand that, listen, we can't just sit back and run the ball every time. We got to find ways to make these plays, and they've got enough talent that they could be able to do that.
Fan base wise, you think it's going to be a pretty busy bounce house? You think it's going to be with the Big 12? You got Big 12 teams coming to town, a little bit better of a home schedule as far as national names, things like that. How excited do you think that the student body is for the bounce house to be jumping?
Well, I think I want to say every home Big 12 game is a sellout at this point. Maybe, nice. I mean, that they've talked about. I mean, there's a ton of excitement. And again, you expect that, you expect to see that kind of excitement going on. I expect to see them have record sales, when it comes to everything. What you hope is that if they can start out strong, I think that just only goes well for them when you're looking at ticket sales. And I think they'll do well on the road as well. I think, I've spoken to some fans. I mean, again, we talked about the travel. It's going to be different for some UCF fans. I mean, listen, to go to Kansas and Kansas State and to go to Boise State, listen, just me packing, getting a trip together to Boise State took
that ain't a direct flight, friends. That ain't a direct
flight. Neither is Lubbock, by the way. So, I think there's challenges that UCF fans, they'll probably pick and choose a lot of their games where they want to go to but I still expect them to show up because I think this is exciting. This is the first year in the Big 12. They want to check out these new cities and these new stadiums and see these new teams. So I think that's where the excitement is going to come from.
Well, Matt, tell everybody where they can find all your great coverage of UCF. And I know, Matt, you do other things throughout the year, but UCF's kind of your main beat this time of year. So tell the fans where they can find all your great work.
It's OrlandoSentinel.com to check out all the latest. We had a couple of our football section came out this past weekend, lots of previews and stuff like that. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at @OSMattMurschel or Threads or whatever you like to get your social media news from.
If you're watching the video, you can see his Twitter handle in the background there on his wall if you're watching the video here. So Matt does a great job covering UCF and all things Orlando sports. We'll definitely check in with Matt as we move through the football season to get some further updates on the Knights and other things. So about one more question. How excited city of Orlando? You had Florida State LSU over the weekend, a big matchup there. And any other big news coming out of the Orlando sports team? Did you guys make it through the storm okay?
We did make it through the storm okay, yeah. And there's a lot of excitement for the Florida State LSU game, obviously surrounding that. And it's just sports. This is a great sports city. So football's coming in. There's a lot of discussion with NFL, Pro Bowl coming in, at the end of the year. So lots of excitement in Orlando, I think, for their sports.
Well, Matt, keep up the great work, man, and we'll be in touch.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.